Hi, everybody. I did my case study on maple syrup urine disease, and because it's such a rare disease and we don't really hear about it that often, I thought it would be a good idea to do a quick refresher of it before we get into the actual case study that I chose. So basically, maple syrup urine disease is a metabolic disorder that's autosomal recessive, so it is inherited, and it occurs when your body can't convert food into energy properly. And this is depicted really well in the image on this slide right here. We can see on the left that in a normal and healthy individual, their body can access protein from their food and their muscles, and this protein is converted into amino acids and then into branched chain amino acids, which are then broken down by branched chain alpha keto acid dehydrogenase enzymes, which are abbreviated to BCKAD enzymes because that is quite a mouthful. And once the BCKAD enzymes break down the branched chain amino acids, we can then use these amino acids for energy and growth and things that basically we assume proteins will do for us. But in an individual with maple syrup urine disease, these branched chain alpha keto dehydrogenase enzymes do not break down the branched chain amino acids, so we get an accumulation of these amino acids. And this buildup is what becomes harmful for us. And in maple syrup urine disease, we see a buildup of mainly the three enzymes leucine, isoleucine, and valine. So now getting into the case study, some history about the patient. He's a male infant and his birth weight was 3,200 grams. He had no history of birth asphyxia and no dysmorphic features. He was breastfed, and the main thing was that he had consanguineous parents. Sorry, I cannot pronounce that word, but this means that the child's father's grandmother and the child's mother's grandmother were sisters, so they had the same great aunt. So this is the biggest hint that the problem is due to genetic inheritance. And when reading that in the case study, I had a lot of time picturing like what that family tree would be. So I just wanted to draw it out for you guys so that you could see, because visuals are very helpful for me. So we can see the black circle at the bottom of this tree is our patient, and the fact that it's all the way filled in or black means that he has the homozygous mutation of the gene and he has maple syrup urine disease. And I couldn't figure out how to do like the halfway filled in we normally see on pedigree charts, so I did gray is what would indicate a heterozygous mutation. So we see that both the parents of the patient have the heterozygous mutation and kind of all the way up in that same family lineage as well. And we see that the patient's great grandmothers, I guess, yeah, they both be great grandmothers, are sisters. So that's how that family is connected. And we see this a lot more when there's close relations in a family like this, that we get more genetic mutations. So some of his clinical signs and symptoms were that he had the fruity urine odor that was, quote, reminiscent of decaying pears. So that's also the maple syrup scent that we frequently hear about. He was drowsy and he had a poor appetite for 7 days. So based on what we know so far about the patient, what tests would you order? So maybe pause the video and think a little bit about what you would do. So the laboratory tests that we ordered were a plasma lactate, glucose, and amino acid analysis, a liver test, a blood count, a gas chromatography mass spectrometry, which measures the level of urine organic acid, and then two tests that we haven't studied, but I just wanted to throw in there because they were included in the case study, were electroencephalogram and an MRI. So this is kind of cool because they're related to the brain, so we can see how this genetic disorder affects the brain a little bit more. So 4 of these tests came back with normal results. So think a little bit about what you think these tests will be, and then also which test do you think will be the most confirmatory for the disease that we know the patient will be diagnosed with. So the tests that came back normal were the plasma lactate and glucose analyses, the liver test, and the blood count. And now for the other tests. So the two brain tests came back with moderate abnormality, so it showed that there's a little stuff wrong, but that probably wasn't the deciding factor of where they went with their diagnosis. And just briefly, I wanted to show a little bit more on the MRI because it included these scans in the image in the case study, which I thought was cool. So the first one is basically the child when they first came in with his problems. You can see kind of the buildup of the amino acids in the brain. And then the image on the bottom shows after he was treated and changed his diet to avoid foods that would automatically contain branched chain amino acids, so this kind of avoided an accumulation of like isoleucine, leucine, and valine. But back to what we've been learning about, the gas chromatography mass spectrometry, as I said, measures the level of urine organic acid, and we saw that the patient had elevated levels of 2-keto isocaproic acid, 2-keto-3-methylvaleric acid, and hydroxysovaleric acid. And the case study did not provide the exact elevated values of the patient, but we can assume that it's because of the lack of the BCKAD enzyme that would break down these amino acids. And the plasma amino acid analysis is the most confirmatory test for this patient. So if you guessed that, you're right. And it showed extremely elevated levels of the branched chain amino acids. Leucine, there was like 3,300 micromole per liter of leucine, and normally it's like 36 to 112. So that was extremely high. And valine was at 613 micromole per liter, which normally it's 46 to 237 micromole per liter. So that was extremely high, and that showed an overaccumulation of these amino acids, which was leading to the patient's symptoms. So I also like this image because it's kind of a nice summary of what is occurring in maple syrup urine disease and showing how elevated the amino acids become. So you can see in the normal range how low it's supposed to be and how high it becomes in a patient with MSUD. So it's pretty drastic. And the other test was a genetic test. So the top image shows the homozygous mutation in the patient, and the bottom image shows the heterozygous mutations that exist in both of the patient's parents. So from the gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, and plasma amino acid analysis, we can see that the lack of the BCKAD enzymes are due to the maple syrup urine disease mutation that causes a buildup of the amino acids in the body and the acids that we saw in the mass spectrometry. And from the genetic test, we can prove that maple syrup urine disease is an autosomal recessive disorder, and it's a genetic disorder that is causing the patient to experience his symptoms. So yes, that is everything, and these are my references on the last slide.